It has been a pleasure getting the opportunity to hear your interviews. And
thank you.
Yes, sir. And then just speaking with some of the students about the knowledge that you possess and how you were just sharing with them and educating when you came over to the conference room, how like that little brief meeting was not as brief as they had thought, because you had so much to share. That was
Yes, and I was so glad that Donovan and everyone made it up there, and I was able to take them to both the fort and actually right to my family property again, which is the Hyde Park community, and I could show them how the location of the community extended from the actual fort to that location, and they were able to really see how actually a self-emancipated organization that the Black Seminoles were. They were not trying to wait on the 1864 emancipation, and that they were constantly and vigilantly living as free men.
Yes.
Within the tribe still, within the tribal, the Seminole tribe in that area. They were very much the tribal leaders, and I actually had someone sent me an email from one of my descendants, my uncle, who was the first Republican National Committee chairman for Florida back in
Republicans were black back then.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And that's the whole point that we don't understand is the fact that we held the United States together as African American people after the Civil War, because they really, really withdrew. Most of the whites withdrew from participating and voting, from participating, and my family down there were very vigilant on, educating their community, getting voter rights, They also were members, and no one ever seems to understand. They were what they call free soilers. The Free Soiler Party existed in Florida. Yes. We hear nothing about that. And the Free Soilers were men who actually, they were before the Republicans.
It was blacks and whites working together.
Working
kind
together.
Of a populist party. So it was very unpopular with many whites, because when blacks and whites got together and could accomplish something, that defeated the whole notion of inferiority. It defeated the whole notion that we could work together, that we could share. And so the Free Soil Party had a great platform, but they couldn't. This is folks from Lake Butler. This is Mr. Eddie Jackson, who we met and worked with our program. So I don't know how aware they are over there of their connections with Black Seminoles, but you might know that, or from speaking to some of these people, they might be able to enlighten it more. This is pictures of Consolidated High School. Go back to the actual school. It's called Consolidated because in 1957, all the area black high schools were consolidated to one. So throughout all of Union County, Consolidated High.
And are you familiar with the Sanford community?
Sanford, I know where
right
Sanford
outside.
is.
Yes, that's modern Trayvon Martin is.
Yeah, that's
what
I know
down there.
most. Yes, sir.
But my family actually is in that community as well, in Sanford, and
amazing. So right on the intercoastal, so access to fishing
and what happened. And my father, he was since passed. He told me that it was his job when he lived in Tallahassee in the Frenchtown community to take the governor to Sanford for the winter. It was like the winter state governor's retreat mansion or whatever.
That's a story that needs to be
and he drove them down there, and that's where he married his first wife in Sanford, and she was actually the principal of the black high school there.
So this is the historic marker of the Consolidated High School. It's April 20th of this year. There were hundreds of people there.
Beautiful marker there.
And it took years to get that together. So
did you all help them acquire that marker, or their organization?
We were peripherally involved, from the historical point of view, but on their own through indigenous connection, local people, some ministers, people that knew. They talked about the fact that Consolidated High School did the annual reunion, and on their own they were able to make the political connections. It took about 2 years to get this to happen. So I've known Mr. Jackson for 11 years, but it's just in the last year and a half, 2 years that this occurred. It just happened on April 20th.
Okay. They just got the signage
just got the
put
marker
out there. Well, yeah, interesting, very interesting.
So what do you know about the connections of Black Seminoles in Union County? Because when Deborah mentioned that, I was like, whoa, this is all just coming together, because we work with so many black high schools.
Well, I'll tell you what I'm not sure, but what I found through my research on my family side, William Bush actually was a Union soldier, but he actually was apparently mixed mulatto, and they listed him in 1858 as a Seminole Scout.
Now, who is William?
He would be my eighth generation grandparent. He's my mother's great grandfather. Okay. And he ended up getting 160 acres in a land pension from the military he mustered out in 1860, before the Civil War. But by 1862, when the Civil War broke out, they took that land and pension from him. He was in actually Chattahoochee is called, what county is that? It's not Gadsden County, it's beside Gadsden. It's Jackson. Actually became Jackson County.
Mariana, they call it
Mariana.
seat because all the lynchings that took place over there.
Yes, and actually my ancestor, William Bush, left and he had already mustered out from his service from 1858 to 1860 and received his land pension. Apparently he married a white woman who was able to collect his land pension without obstruction after. And I actually have the land pension that I got out of Washington, D.C. for it. But they were run out of the county, first thing being a mixed couple. They thought he was an Indian.
Yeah, once they found out he was
black.
Once
they found out he was black.
Yeah.
And he ended up kidnapping his kids and raising them there in Hyde Park. And my mother, Minnie Farmer, is the third generation with that same name, Minnie Farmer. And the Farmers got their name in Wakulla County because of the First Seminole War. When the capitulation took place, they laid their arms down and became farmers. And so they adopted that name from Bush to Farmer. And the Bushes became farmers, and the Bush people were what I, researched under that Bush name and found out that they were all Seminoles. The Bushes were Seminole people who intermarried with the African Americans who came into the community, still before slavery ended. And
this is what I was going to ask you, because you said he was a Seminole Scout in 1858. The Seminole Wars were the 1830s, middle 40s. So this entire period of time before Florida actually becomes a state, blacks, mulattoes.
Yes, and they're listed as mulattoes.
All living together, and fighting against the U.S. government successfully.
Absolutely successfully. Maintaining their lands, maintaining their tribal agreement lands, like on the Wakulla River, right, where Hyde Park community is. That was in the first tribal agreement from the First Seminole War at Apalachicola, when they capitulated, and those tracts of land, they started setting up reservations for the native people along the rivers where their communities existed, and Wakulla community existed on that Wakulla River, on the west bank of the Wakulla River, and they were always still highly involved in fishing. They were fishermen. They were people who fed themselves through oysters and fish and seafood. Earliest aquaculture people in that area, on that beach area, and my family still maintains it, but the elders of the family are dying off and everything, and like my siblings in age group, they're ready to sell it. No, we're not going back there ever. My mother even had a propensity not to want to go back, even though she's buried there in the cemetery now. When we moved, my father had to buy a house in Orlando because she did not want to live in that area, and all of her siblings died before they were 50. Of the male siblings, because they wanted that land along that river and down at the beach.
So none of those reservation agreements still exist today. They're all violated, or do any?
Yeah, they just were right. They were negated and not.
Because after the Second Seminole War, everybody was shipped out.
Exactly. But we got to remember John Caballo. He came back 3 times from what was called Indian Territory to get other tribal members to come out and say that, hey, but they still ran into more problems with the Creeks out there.
Choctaw.
And Choctaw selling blacks into slavery again.
Have you seen any of this new Taylor Sheridan novels, Yellowstone? There's Yellowstone, 1883, 1923.
Yeah.
They did another one on Bass Reeves. And they talked about him being the first black marshal in Arkansas. But his territory meant that he went over into Indian territory, spoke Choctaw, dealt with Cherokee that were there, Seminoles were there. Have you seen any of that series? Have you heard anything about it, the Bass Reeves series that Taylor Sheridan put together?
Yes, I had, but I haven't watched any of it per se. But I actually had a personal friend in Washington who was a descendant of Bass Reeves, and he worked at the African American Civil War Museum. He has since passed, and he had a collection of Bass Reeves family materials and stuff like that he submitted to the African American Civil War Memorial Museum in Washington.
I love the design of that building. Twice going to Washington because of rain and also because I didn't control my own transportation. I've not yet got to go into that building.
To the Civil War.
But it's just,
or the African American history.
It's just incredible.
Yes, it is.
The way they textured it, the color, it's so unique and original.
Absolutely. I think they did a masterful job on that. And I have been a fellow of the Smithsonian for 25 years.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, and I've worked with them earlier, before they even got to that program of building it, because it took them about 50 years to get all the funding and everything to build the African American Museum. So while being there, I always was supportive of the plan and the idea of that African American museum being built. But they built and I was even they built the Native American Museum. Those were the last two museums put on the mall. The Native American and African American museums are the latest museums of the Smithsonian. And yet, Charles Smithson, who endowed the Smithsonian Institute from England, his whole goal was to provide a cultural space for Native American history. That was the first mandate that he wanted out of his will, and it ended up being the next with the African Americans. And his endowment actually was more than the budget for the capital city of Washington, D.C. for the Smithsonian at that time. And it still is a strong endowment. But Congress controls it, but it was really made for the capital city of Washington. And apparently they did not want that endowment or budget to ever fall in the hands of the mayor or the district government.
That has been the kind of the curse of Washington, D.C., hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Government run by the United States Congress.
Yes, it has.
Instead of being independent.
That's exactly it.
If you were in your mind to just for a second, free it up and just take a loose association, directionally, say we're a compass, and you were to take the community that you're most familiar with Black and Seminole and Indigenous people, and look in each direction, what would the next community that you know of, if you were to look to the west, what would be the closest community like yours with the same type of ancestry, or north or east?
Well,
if we could draw a line to some of those.
Well, there is a community in Madison County.
Okay.
That's called Hicksville. It was founded by John Hicks, who was originally at the Negro Fort.
I drove through there yesterday.
And he became he was actually the first chief of the Seminoles. And when he founded this community, they eventually moved to the Swanee River area, because of the ongoing conflict. And they moved there. But the town of Madison is now the Black community is looking for that community. There was a state marker there 25 years ago that I remember that said Hicksville on that property, but no one knows of it.
HICKS.
Yes. Yes.
So when you said the
John
Swanee
Hicks
River,
is
now that's a large little stretch going up. I'm thinking about from Branford up closer toward Live Oak. So what part on the Swanee River?
Well, I would say that they were north of what is Perry today.
North of Perry, okay.
North of Perry today, and that's where Madison County comes in, just there. And that was a Seminole stronghold for sure. And they were, along with Miccosukee, I can't forget Miccosukee, actually, that was the largest community attacked by Andrew Jackson of free Seminole people. And Miccosukee, believe it or not, Dr. Wallace Tenney, her family came from Miccosukee, and she's a second generation Miami. So, her family's been in Miami at least. Well,
not Miami Indians or ancestry, but not Miami City.
No, the city of Miami.
Okay.
She's been in Miami, actually, West Palm.
Okay, what part of West Palm?
Right there at Chai Chi Village. We just put a dedicated marker there, and Chai Chi Village is in stone's throw away from Mar-a-Lago.
Okay, so this is on the other side of the intercoastal, or is it on the west of the?
Actually, the river that divides West Palm Beach from Palm Beach, it's on the west bank. That's where we dedicated the sign to the village. But that was all their farmland.
Okay,
which was on the other side.
So I got another question from you because I grew up in West Palm. That's where my dad's people are from. When the sticks were taken over, is that something that includes the same people?
Yes.
I knew it would be.
Yes, yes. And Doctor, please get a chance to talk with Dr. Tenney. She is an expert. That's where her family came from.
Amazing.
Yeah, their family came from there, and she ended up living in Miami, and she put this organization, the Black History Research, and actually it's a Seminole Maroon Black History Research Project.
Did she ever work with, before he passed, the late Dr. C. Spencer Pompey?
I can't say, but I'm almost sure she did, because she's an educator in the West Palm Beach school system. She's retired from that school system. She gets the Palm Beach College to give her all the facilities and information. But she started working with a brother named Bryant. His last name was Bryant. And he actually took us out to the Loxahatchee battlefield area, showed them where the community was before it became a state-managed and controlled park. Now, she has pretty much devoted herself, her retired life to this research. And she is a member of the Loxahatchee Board, and she also is a member of a number of tribal organizations. After we left our group meeting in Apalachicola this year, I took her over to Lake Miccosukee, because she said she had never been there and she just wanted to go. And she said that her mother's family's name were Joneses. And we just went to the lake, and she just looked. We really didn't meet or interact, but she's anxious. And now Bill Steele, who was on our committee at Apalachicola, he's an archaeologist, or let's say he's an archaeologist, not an anthropologist. But he's an archaeologist, and he did the Loxahatchee screening. He also did a couple of things related to for the tribe in Alligator Alley down there, and he is listed on there. I didn't bring my map with me that he developed of the sites, but he is now developing and doing an archaeological research of the community at Miccosukee. He is understanding clearly that it was a African American community with the native people, and that the chief of that was, at that time, I think John Hicks came out of there. And they all came to the Negro Fort to become the First Nations people, the Seminole Nation. There were multiple different tribes that made up and came to that fort under the British flag. That was provincial British land. Actually, it was Commonwealth land Florida was part of the British Commonwealth. The western border to Pensacola was the Western Commonwealth. And that land where the fort stood was still provincial land.
Florida was under Six Flags, so
Yes.
the British were the last. When you take it back just for a second to the sticks, I think about some work that was done at Palm Beach State College and Palm Beach Junior College by Dr. Melvin Haynes, who was the vice president of the college at that time. They wrote a book called Like a Mighty Banyan. Have you heard of that book?
No, I'm not familiar.
It talked about, the virtues of the banyan tree and how it spread out in the brackish water and things like that.
Yeah.
But it also talked about the sticks community. It talked about the hurricanes in 28 and 35 where so many people died and you're buried in mass graves, one of which became like the city dump of the city of West Palm Beach, unfortunately. But what connection do Black Seminoles have with that sticks community, if any, that you know of?
They were totally descendants of the Black Seminole, the Maroon community that existed prior to the U.S. government.
Yeah, because how'd they get there?
Exactly. And they also, one of the things that we just did in West Palm, the Saltwater Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, because a lot of those people became intercommunal with the Bahamas, also Cat Island, also, and their
Red
Bays, all of those communities. The Bowleg family, who comes out of, they are Chief Bowleg's descendants.
Yes.
But by the time you look at it they paint Chief Bowlegs as a white Seminole, and he was actually a dark Seminole. He was a Black Seminole. He was a Seminole, but he was all Seminole. He Bowlegs, and he intermarried with runaways and their generational families.
That's where the Maroons whole thing comes from.
Yes, and that's where they then become the Maroon communities long before the Fort Lauderdale or these incorporated vehicles of towns. But yet, racism and bigotry never allowed them to get standardized. But the thing of it is, what I find that my people were very much aware of the astrological positioning of the stars and of the navigating of their ways. Yes, they were water people. They were people who actually embarked on these waters in their flat ships. I wish you could have come to a museum. We have a 32-foot cutout canoe.
I would love to see that.
That's in the museum that we found up on the banks of the Apalachicola River. And it is something that, we protect. But it shows that it could hold up to 20 people in that thing, 32 foot, and oarsmen, and they could travel all over the Gulf, and they traveled all on the western intercoastal areas long before it was settled by whites. And this is how they got down into central Florida, into the areas around even Brooksville and near the Angola settlement, the Angola settlement, which was Dr. Rosalind Howard. She and Dr. Tenney worked simpatico, heads over heels. They've been there, and they actually came up with the theoretical name of the Saltwater Underground Railroad Network.
So funny how friends of the program always connect us. I'm thinking of Larry Rivers.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Rivers, formerly of Armstrong State, now at FAMU. When he wrote the thing about the Underground Railroad going south, we didn't have the name of it, the Saltwater Underground Railroad, but now we can connect that with Larry Rivers and his scholarship.
Yes.
And because he also, has much literature that talked about how, the Underground Railroad didn't just go to the north.
No. From throughout the 19th century, it was an active, connected group of tribal communities that were able to, go throughout the state of Florida. I mean, we didn't have to just get back into this Everglades corner.
Yeah.
But, now over the years, we realize that a lot of those in the Everglades, a lot of those Seminoles there come from Oklahoma and have come back. And this is why they don't extend themselves into the Black Seminole communities or try to get them on the rosters. And I hope, and Dr. Tenney and I have discussed this, it's good that we can educate our people in our community, but we actually need to get into a reclamation referendum or forum with the tribe first, with the tribe, and let them understand we do, we hold our relations and kinships as important in Florida, but as well. And, I think even in Oklahoma, the reason they don't want the blacks in the tribes in Oklahoma is all because they don't want to distribute the funds to them, and they think that there'll be an onslaught of blacks claiming this.
Quantum. Everybody's like, test my DNA.
Absolutely. So it's so important for Dr. Tinney's work to continue to extend and show that there is a connection of the Black Seminole Maroon communities in Florida that did not leave, did not go out to Oklahoma. As a matter of fact, John Horse was able to come back into Florida in his 3 trips and reestablish himself.
Well, they're in Madison and now perhaps in Union County. So that's coming east. If we were to go north, or what will we find? Will we find anything in southeast Georgia or southwest Alabama?
Yes, I was going to say in Chattahoochee, the Chattahoochee tribe that sits right on the tri-state region, Alabama, Georgia, western Georgia, eastern Alabama region. You can actually go to Chattahoochee and walk into Alabama from Florida, and
because they didn't recognize those borders. Their borders were tribal, not the United States, what we designated, or what the Spanish and the British designated.
Yeah, and those borders went all the way to Tuskegee, Alabama. It brought those tribes from Tuskegee and even further north into Georgia. I'm trying to remember the name of that tribe now. The Coetas, or there's another tribe right outside of the town of Hawkinsville, Georgia. And I've been meeting, and they were somewhat part of the tribe that came down and fought against the Negro.
Was that the Yamasee?
No, okay. The Yamasee who came out of South Carolina. They actually we've just engaged agreement with the Yamasee tribal leaders to come to Apalachicola.
Chief Sekou?
Chief Sekou, yes.
Love Chief Sekou.
Yes. We've invited him to the Negro Fort so that he can truly get to understand how the fact that, yes, the Yamasee did incorporate and become the Seminole people after having raised and did their insurgencies in South Carolina. They had to come into Florida, but they were able to go back and forth, even once the plantocracy system developed.
Well, so many local slaves, Hale Plantation around here, they were walked from South Carolina here.
Yes.
So Gainesville has, what's called the leading black families here. Many are descended from those slaves who walked from South Carolina here and ended up on Hale Plantation and some of these other areas. In fact, there was supposed to be some kind of a big meeting at Hale Plantation that dealt with, this is another story, but dealt with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes because South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana were the undecided votes, electoral college, that there was supposedly some kind of a convention here among the representatives from those states to help determine how the votes would ultimately be distributed that led to Hayes being elected instead of Tilden.
I can believe that.
So many ties. It's so fascinating.
Yes, it is.
Why do you think we don't know more about this stuff? I mean, you yourself.
I agree.
I think we're brilliant, but why don't other people also know about these historic ties?
Well, I think that it was intentional, first in the miseducation of our people in this state, through segregation, through, and in order to, as the schools started here, after the HBCU specifically, they were normal schools. They were to normalize ex-slaves into the community so that they did not take the emphasis of educating us on Florida history that pertained to us, and they wanted us to adopt the idea that we were all brought over on this transatlantic slave trade, which we were not. We were not definitively, especially in the West Coast side, and then the
we came with the Spanish.
Yeah. The Portuguese.
Yeah,
and
the
Spanish.
Portuguese, exactly. How they get
Absolutely.
their cattle here.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, that's truly the way what they did. And they started a hacienda system. The same land we lived on in Hyde Park was a hacienda. Because you have to understand that Hyde Park community was part of St. Mark's community in 1524 when the Spanish first arrived. It was already a designated village for those indigenous people there. My mother's family are those indigenous people who come there. And as we adopted to the civil rights movement and things like that, we just freely accepted being Negroes and then African Americans, because I got aunts and uncles who still don't. I don't hear that African American stuff. We're not African American.
Any connection to Estadarico?
Yeah, I think that in that area, and Estevanico was indeed, he first arrived with the Cerveza de Baca party that came there, and actually on the Wakulla River, archaeologists have found the first, what do you call it, where you hammer out those steel? No, the big large things that they can smelt steel and stuff.
Okay.
They brought that in there from the original Cerveza de Baca and Navarrez party because their ships got lost and they had to rebuild and make ships. And on that Wakulla River is where the first ship was built that they took all the way to Galveston, Texas, and later back to Mexico City. And this is in like 1425, 1426. They go back and they write a book and come back. Come back to Cuba. And then they try to cite a second expedition with Estevanico. He never leaves North America from there. And like I said, I believe he intermarries and brings that bloodline of Africans right on the Wakulla River.
Yeah.
You know, and he traversed that whole area. They went all the way back to Mexico City after leaving the Wakulla River. But only 4 or 5 went back. The rest stayed and created the settlement of St. Mark's. And, you know, that's where the fort at St. Mark's was built from. And it all had, and they were Portuguese speaking. Matter of fact, my DNA, I have my DNA, I had it done. And before my mother passed, I told her this. I said, Moms, for some reason, my DNA says that through my mitochondrial, through your family, that we are 49% Indo-European and 51% African. And my mother says, "Oh, we've never married any whites. We don't have European blood in us." I said, "Well, I'm just telling you what this thing says." She says, "Oh, I don't believe it." And, you know, I mean, but at the same time, since then, since I've had it done a second time, and it gave me the same results. And that Indo-European classification says that we could either be Portuguese, Spanish, or they even said it could be Turkish.
Okay.
Now that's where our bloodline goes into from the mitochondrial side. It goes in, and the people that did it said, "Hey man, you know, your family probably were the first ones to interact with the Spanish or Portuguese on that river." And I said, "That's very well," but my mother said, "No, man, we've never, you know."
Well,
You know, I said, "But, you know, you married Dad's black, so that's where I got the 51% African and the 49%. She says, "Oh, they're not right. They're not right." You know, I mean, but that just says that they immediately befriended, let's say that, the early Spaniards and early Portuguese who came in. And if it goes back into Turkish, that's just like the Berbers. You know, it goes as far back as
North Africa
connection.
The Crusades.
Yes.
Gold, salt, slaves.
And they were in Florida. Florida was known as the Iberian Peninsula, New Iberia, as a matter of fact, on maps. They called Florida New Iberia, and they didn't include it as part of the 13 colony at that time. So I think that we really need to follow more on that. I'd love to, you know, within my family bloodline. But all my aunts, even my aunts married into married black men, but I have other members who are out west that married whites, and that are and so I mean, we don't ever see ourselves as non-Americans, though. We see ourselves all as this American melting pot.
Florida was parts of many countries and many nations for a long time. What do you see as the future of the scholarship? What comes out of these conversations and the work that you do and work with others? Where's it going?
Well, for me, it's going into a reconciliation and reclamation project that we are doing up in Apalachicola.
Before you go on, what does that mean for you?
Okay. Well, what reclamation means is that we want to get back to our original land borders, our original treaties, and that we actually now have to convince the Miccosukee tribe in South Florida that we are their descendants. And by doing that, we want to then start taking legal action. Mm-hmm. That reclamation importance is like, and we don't want to get it mixed up with reparations.
Reconciliation and reclamation is not reparations.
Yes, it's not reparations, not at all.
So what's the distinction between the two?
The distinction is that we're indigenous landowners, and that we were given, we shared, like for instance, at the Negro Fort on the Apalachicola River, we used diplomatic liaisons since the French and Indian War. We had become, we went and educated young kids and younger tribal people over in England. They became part of the Court of Bass, which is why that fort was given permission to be built on the Apalachicola River. Then there was a controversy there because in 1789, George Washington actually signed an agreement, the first native agreement that he signs in New York, because the capital is in New York at this time. He lists that the Apalachicola River is the far western border of the 13 colonies.
Just appropriated it. This is ours.
Yes. So now everything in Florida, though, he said belonged to the Spanish and the Native American people, which were black Seminoles. And let me just say, the only reason that the Southern Underground Railroad worked is because the tribal communities were the same or looked the same. You could blend in with it. And the Underground Railroad's biggest success was the tribal communities that existed out there, harboring and helping them get, off of the plantation society grounds and into their homelands. And my whole thing is that we need to reclaim our homelands. It's something that we can now document, we can understand and interpret. And, I'm not saying they got to give us, move off our land or anything like that.
Pay the back rent.
Yeah, or at least give us stewardship of our forest, the Apalachicola National Forest. There was 1 million acres stolen from the Native American tribe that the British government held court at Prospect Bluff. And they gave it back to the Native Americans. They gave them their 1 million acres back. Edward Nichols was the head principal judge or governor, whoever, for Britain, and he legally transferred that 1 million acres back to the tribe. And that 1 million acres goes from the Apalachicola River to the Wakulla River.
What kind of a role do you think, this is kind of a tangent, but I hope you feel it's related, what kind of a role could Charles III play? He has talked to nations of the Commonwealth about ancestry and what was stolen. And he hasn't said reparations necessarily, but he has been very open to talking about the historical role that Britain played in all of this. And since Britain was the last country that had ownership before the United States took ownership, and Florida becomes Florida in 1845, is there a role for the British royalty to play in acknowledging some of these claims, talking about the history? They took people with them when they left. What role could be played there?
Absolutely. Well, let me just say that the late Colin Powell was actually he was, what are they, knighted, a member of the Court of Bass when he was chief of staff in the White House. And they gave him his ranking and his work as a chief warrior under the fact that he represented the United States government, and the fact that he did, they were bringing all these tribal treaties and things back to before his death. But after his death, the State Department didn't follow up on it. Mm-hmm. The U.S. doesn't want to follow up on it, because it means having to acknowledge that there are homelands that people still live on here in Florida, that they're now letting the county governments liquidate them and sell them and do everything. And I think that we got to go back and understand more of what the Court of Bass Agreement, the Treaty of Ghent, did for us. And I mean, that was a global treaty. This is the same global treaty that I think now we have to tie into the environmental treaties that they're trying. The Treaty of Paris, which was just, our president just rejoined the, what is that group called over there?
The G7, G20?
Yeah, the global, and everything that deals with
climate
change initiatives are the only way that we truly can get back in and reclaim our stewardship of the land. And, we're not saying, the first thing when I bring it up in these U.S. forestry meetings, we don't have enough money to do these projects and this and this. And I'm like, well, I think that you got to start including the tribe or include a path to go back and let us get reclamation of our lands in the state of Florida, in California, because there are still Black Indian tribes in California, that exist and everything. And we're not saying that we want to take it and kick people off the land. What we're saying is that if you acknowledge us and the stewardship aspect of it, we will avoid climate disasters, because number one, we had been harmoniously living with our environment. It was the Europeans that came in that kind of wanted to take everything without acknowledging that people were here. They wanted to act like this was a barren land with no human existence.
I notice you haven't used the term settler colonialism, but do you see a connection? You seem to be suggesting a connection between the Treaty of Paris in 1763 and the Treaty of Ghent and the Treaty of Paris in 1787 and George Washington writing a letter in 1789. These are historic constructs that had specific ties and things that were promised, but they were not. Yes. They were not acknowledged because of the settler colonialism aspect. How do you reconcile that?
Well,
and do you expect people to take it seriously?
As we look at today's politics, it's merely wishful thinking on my part, and more so it is limiting the constructs of ever accepting guilt or fault in the hiding of this information and the getting rid of, the central United States tribes. They know nothing of what happened in Florida prior to what happened to tribes east of the river, east of the Mississippi, unless it's through the Indian Removal Act out to Oklahoma. But they were not successful at all with that. That Indian Removal Act was Florida population doubled, tripled from the runaways and the indigenous folks who just weren't going to follow and go out west to those tribes out west, because they knew that they knew all the river and areas that were theirs and that hadn't yet been invaded by Europeans. So it's hard to see where our government, but I think, let me just say, I belong to an organization in Washington with J. Winter Nightwolf, who is Cherokee, also a couple of brothers from the out of Massachusetts. They're actually their tribes are called the Narragansett, and there's another tribe. But we've all met in Washington, put a strategy in place, and our goal there was to simply have those tribes east of the Mississippi reunify in what we call the National Congress of Black American Indians. And we meet annually in Washington. And what it does, though, and what our group kind of really emphasizes is the matriarchal importance of why our indigenous people still exist. It is the matriarchal connection that controls tribal life in North America. Even in the Seminole tribes, the women maintain all of it. All the way down to where I see as Black Maroon Seminole people and the direction that we have, we realize that inevitably the chiefdoms, being male, have all been slaughtered or have all been bamboozled and given. So what we try to do at the National Congress of Black American Indians is actually give the female leadership a role where they do these healing ceremonies. They try to help with women in Native indigenous people in urban settings who have a psychological break to what their professional careers are, and then why their, let's say, their indigenous native instinct still come out and take over. And it kind of gives us a break in our real duties as professionals. And then so what we do with NCBAI, we go to churches and we go to different areas and we hold these women healing ceremonies. We do everything from the burning the sage and the ceremonial stuff, but we go further. One of our directors on the board is a
Sage.
hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? is a clinical psychologist, and they do real help to heal the family, say, who are professionals in one life, but they still understand their instinctual connection to tribal life. And so we try to develop seminars that help them reconcile with that. We do, as a matter of fact, Jay Winter Nightwolf, he has a podcast radio show. That comes on YouTube and on Facebook. And many of the sisters of the tribe get together and they try to find out how they can, even if they're in abusive marriages, their husbands can't understand why they make more money than they do or whatever. And yet these women are professional women in one life, and they're still connected, though, to the tribal intuitiveness of their tribal relations. And this is what National Congress of Black American Indians is. It's for all our tribal relations and families to heal through. And we find that it is more set and directed by our the women of the tribe. And it's really picked up. We go to Philadelphia, we go to Massachusetts, we've been up to Martha's Vineyard. Believe it or not, the Narragansetts are the true owners of Martha's Vineyard. And these people know it, but they have Oak Bluff in that area where there are those people who own hotels for centuries now, and like in our community in Hyde Park, have been there. They originally greeted the first Europeans that came to Massachusetts. And these people are darker than I am, in Connecticut. And even though they give you these casinos and things like that, Trump said something about the Connecticut tribe up there, hey, they don't look like Indians. Those are black people trying to get in. He made those statements.
He does.
And, you know, so.
Do you see any connection? We talk about women. I think it's not in our mission. We just haven't talked about them yet. But I think of the chiefess, head of state, Her Majesty Queen Quet, with the Gullah Geechee people.
Yes.
We talked about Yamasee, but we didn't talk about them. Where do the Gullah Geechee fit into this family of relationships?
Well, indeed, and we have just signed an agreement. I was trying to look it up just then. The North Florida African American History Corridor Group. We've just signed an
Amelia
agreement.
Island, the Georgia.
Right, we're trying to bring the
Seattle,
South Carolina, the Gullah Geechees, the Yamasee, and others. Actually, there is a good friend who lives in Florida, who is one of our drummers at our event, Brother Akko. His family is Yamasee, and they own like 20, 30 acres along the Apalachicola River, the Flint River area, which has been their family's land since they came here. And so we're trying to bring Chief Sekou and his tribe to our not our next event, but coming in probably in November. We're going to have them come in and participate. And what we want to do is bring the other tribal members from South Florida, working with Dr. Tenney, up to the fort, and just bring them to understand, because I'll tell you this much. It's a two-edged sword we're dealing with when we're dealing with the U.S. Forestry Service and we're dealing with the State Forestry Service. They're still timbering wood off of that land, and that's their priority, their timber contracts. Then they come to us and tell us, well, we have to raise funds to put a pavilion out there, or even to put an interpretive center out there. We must raise our own funds, and they must manage those funds. And we're self-determined people. We didn't go all this way to come back and deal with the agents of the United States again. And a lot of the tribe in South Florida don't come to these meetings. I participate in them, and I was actually even offered a sort of a position on that board, but I declined because I wanted to keep with the North Florida African American History Corridor Project Group.
Spop's first work with the National Park Service was some interviews at World Golf Village in St. Augustine, where Queen Quet, Chief Sekou, and folks from Red Bays were all there. We did interviews. So there were some blacks
at Fort Mose.
We did not go to Fort Mose, but we talked about Fort Mose a lot. Yes.
Originally, I came here.
Pardon?
Originally, I moved to Florida to work with the saving of Fort Mose, because in 1999, that fort was put on the National Historic Preservation List as one of the most endangered sites. And they were about to, the City Council of St. John's had made an agreement to sell that site to Gulf World.
It was my understanding that the man that owned it knew some of the historical background to it, but he wasn't black.
No, he wasn't.
And he wasn't really interested in, I don't know, but this is my understanding.
We came from
describe
Washington with injunctive.
Yeah, because he wanted to just sell it away and not
Right,
the history
not
or
get
the
in
fort or anything. After they found stuff, he wanted to sell it even quicker.
Even quicker, right. And he had negotiated with St. Johns County.
This is what I heard.
And they were trying to build a juvenile detention center elsewhere. And we had to put an injunction out of Washington to stop the sale of that property.
Thank goodness that you did that.
So that it could become, and we had a conference there, and we let them know that this is
a National Historic Site.
a National Historic Preservation
Was there
Site.
anything that you want with that? I feel like I've monopolized the questions for however long.
We just received that, Tamarra.
You got this.
Yes, they sent that to us, so we're going to take it over to Apalachicola.
National Underground Railroad Network Freedom with a star in the center. It's gold. The face of a black indigenous woman, who probably Seminole as well, and a star. What do all these symbols recognize?
Well,
What is that iconography?
it actually recognizes the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom and the symbolization of the North Star, and the trekking faces towards the North Star. But they sent me this from Washington. Ted from Jacksonville. They called, and he went out to Apalachicola. He came to Apalachicola, he and his wife, to visit the museum and everything. So he says, okay, I'm going to call Washington. July 4th, I went to Washington. Believe it or not, I went to this community called Highland Beach, where Frederick Douglass founded this community in Annapolis, he and his son. And they modeled the community after Oak Bluffs in Massachusetts when he went to Massachusetts. And every historical black college president has a home up in this community in Annapolis.
Really?
They've done it ever since they started the normal schools for Negroes. Tuskegee, Hampton, every president has a home there. Howard, you know. And
it's an underrepresented story.
Yeah, I would love to take you there. As a matter of fact, we set on July 4th, they had someone reenact and do the Frederick Douglass speech.
4th of July speech.
Why we should, you know. And it was all family members and everything. The Murray family still lives there, who was Frederick Douglass' first wife, Anna Murray. He built a new house just in the lot next door to it for his second wife, who was a white woman who came from England. And they tried to block him because she was going to give him $1 million. Back then, when he was alive, and the federal government said that he was still wanted and left the country as, you know, because of his abolitionist views with John Brown. And same thing they did to Farrakhan when he was given that money from, you know how it goes. But anyway, and he built that community so his wife, his new wife, could live without harassment. And that community it's predominantly a black community, but you can Google up Highland Beach. It's one of the oldest. As a matter of fact, they've celebrated there. And I used to live down there. You know, my family had a place there. So I go there, you know, just to visit, and we went on the 4th. But it is one of the most intriguing sites of early African American communities that were developed, and all of, like I said, everybody there, you know, is doing something, including Charlene Drew Jarvis, the Jarvis family. You know, these houses there of people who, you know, Dr. Drew, who founded Blood Plasma.
Charles Drew,
yeah. Their family home is up there, and you know, it's like beach retreat. When you're not, you come there to Washington and you stay there. It's a, you know, all beautiful. You know, people have boats and everything on the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm going to say it's quite an elitist community.
University presidents.
Yeah, it's an elitist community in its own right, but it is very important that we acknowledge this place too. You know, I would love to take you up there on the 4th of July.
Love to go.
Celebration, man. We could go, and you know, they'll make great accommodations. It's a beautiful community, and it's 100% involved with the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad on the eastern shore of Maryland. You know, they've now named that area. It's Harriet Tubman National Park over there on the eastern shore, which is right next to the what is it, Blackwater National Park there, and the Blackwater Company exists there. That was owned by
the military.
Yeah, that was owned by the vice president under the Bush family. What was his name? Cheney. Mm-hmm. Dick Cheney's company, Blackwater, named themselves after this national forest.
I didn't know that. When you think of the reputation that Blackwater got in the war.
Yes, in Louisiana.
It's ironic. Yeah.
It is very ironic. So I always note that. I'm like, wow, we're in the Blackwater National Forest. And they've changed half the name of that forest to the Harriet Tubman National Forest now. And the Underground Railroad.
Positive PR.
Yeah, right. Positive spin on the PR. So, because they got their hands full up there. But I enjoyed the 4th, and I stayed up there a couple of weeks. And we all, you know, believe it or not, it's a changing of a guard. So many people that I knew there have passed on, but they still carry the tradition of 4th of July party the day after the 4th of July. It's on the 5th, and they let Frederick Douglass read his speech. So it has the tonal understanding of why are we celebrating the 4th of July, and we're still fighting for our rights as citizens. So all of that is, and I just wanted to say that this is going to be placed on the building in Apalachicola, the Cotton Exchange building.
You go. Excellent.
And the North Florida African American History Corridor Group is going to place this there in their museum, and that's where we actually have an extensive exhibit there of the Royal British Marines who were at the Negro Fort. And their story, this is so much the story. These Royal British Marines were mustered out from the War of 1812. They actually came from the eastern shore of Maryland. They showed the British how to go in and burn Washington. And they came back after that, and they were left in British West Florida, given muster rolls. After they mustered out, they were given documentation that were really literally freeman's paper that showed them as longshoremen and able to go anywhere with their passbook on
as
British soil.
Citizens.
As British, same as in Canada. And so this is how the Underground Network to Freedom is established by these folks. And it leads from Apalachicola River. It goes as far as Trinidad, the Bahamas, Nova Scotia, and the leader, Edward Nichols, ends up as an admiral controlling Cape Verde off the west coast of Africa. And he assigns freeman's papers to anyone leaving off there. The Cape Verdeans that end up in Boston, like Crispus Attucks and others, who were longshoremen. They were using their British documents to remain free. And they were also, viable, being paid as these military people. But the Apalachicola River was a safe haven in British West Florida. And after the War of 1812, 1814, when they built the Negro Fort, it was all up and down that river were communities and free black settlements that came from the War of 1812 in British West Florida. And they ended up becoming part of the Seminole Support Militia.
Resistance against Andrew Jackson when he came through there.
They were the resistance 100% against Andrew Jackson. And Andrew Jackson knew that they had already, after the Battle of New Orleans, the war was over. There was no more War of 1812 taking place. And yet they come into Florida and use that as the excuse.
Well, George Washington did write that letter. Who knows how much of that? But it specifically said Apalachicola River.
Yes. So he ends up on that river. He destroys that fort. There's a mass grave there of more than 280 bodies in that fort. That we want. Our goal, we hope that park can be an African American memorial park. A national African American memorial park.
Oh, excuse me, please.
And that is one of the goals that I hope we get out of it, that we can at least have that park acknowledged as such. But currently it's controlled by U.S. Forestry Service, and they have an agreement with Florida State Forestry Service. I told them I got signage to even put out there at the fort.
Yes.
They told me I had to go through a whole set of protocols in order to hang it out there. So that's all right, we're going to put it down in our museum down at the headwaters of the river. But I would love for you to come up. You got to come up and check out the Apalachicola Fort as well as the museum there.
I helped process their travel up.
Yes. I wish more of you could have come. I wanted everyone to attend. But we're doing other events. Like I said, in November we're planning on something, and actually, we're planning on doing something with the tribe from down in South Florida to acknowledge the first Seminole War. And this is where the first Seminole War took place, right on those grounds. And the significance of that is more significant than anything.
Yes. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm gonna have to go. Okay. I apologize. But maybe we get a picture together before I run.
Oh, let's do that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because if you don't take a picture, it didn't happen.
All right. Well, I'm when you come back in town next week or whatever, we'll schedule something.
I'd love for you to come
August,
out
I'll
to
come back.
Union County and help us see what that connection is out there.
Yes, I would love to. I would love to.